Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. When it comes to the news for EVE Online, I actually personally didn't keep up with it all that well, but we got I think like another news article / dev blog explaining a little bit more what's coming between now and FanFest, and it is pretty big. There's actually quite a few changes that have been announced, including the rebalancing of structures, which is mostly focused on the fighting aspect of structures. I think it could definitely be interesting to see how that will develop. What I found interesting as well is that after the change that they've done for the battleships, they're now actually starting to look at some other ships as well, including a first Tech 3 cruiser like the Proteus and stealth bombers that also receive or will receive probably a little bit of a buff so that they're able to launch or relaunch bombs more quickly. I think it's really interesting. Those are definitely interesting changes that could have an impact on the markets as well. I think they also mentioned that they're working on changes to blueprints, which will be potentially something that'll have a big, or probably even the biggest impact on the market this week, as well people will probably speculate on what gets nerfed, what gets buffed, will it be easier to make certain types of ships, and as a result, what I have seen already from my personal experience is that my BPCs are starting to sell a little bit more quickly and at better prices as well. Let's start with a quick look at the New Eden store. If I'm not mistaken, there is a sale happening. It could be that just on the website. So let's take a quick look here at ship skins, if there's anything on sale here. Nope, we've got the Serpentis skins that are front and center, and the Sanctuary skins as well for the Sisters of Eve ships. Let's take a quick look at the services. Those are just the 12-month Omega. I think those are just the package deals, so nothing special to report here. But on the website for EVE Online, there is definitely a way to get more out of your Omega time, if I'm not mistaken. Alright, let's move on to the market then. And as always, we start with some plex and stuff coming in at 225. There we go. So you can see here as well, plex are up and continuing to go up, and we have a pronounced 1 year high point with the plex chart going above 3 million for the average prices, even 5-day moving average making its way up there, 20-day moving average at the highest point for the year as well. Volumes have started to drop. I do of course think that the plex for good drive, which I think will have ended at this point, will be a major culprit here. CCP even announced that they're still counting, I think, the exact results, but that it's a lot. So we will see, but at this point, sellers for plex are going up to almost 3.2 million, and buyers, there we go, actually up above 3 million as well. Haven't seen that in a long time. Player-owned trade hub, so here the Tranquility Trading Tower basically competing with JITA, but not really outdoing it in any direction. It's 3.2 million for the sellers, 3 million for the buyers, and a 1 year high point. Interesting to see this high point just about, what is it, a bit over a month from FanFest itself, and what could be announced there could have a big impact here as well. Quite often, actually, FanFest has been a bit of a turning point for the plex market, so I would be careful. I would, if you want to sell, I would start looking into selling at this point, because that's usually been the pattern: high points around FanFest and then actually a decline, because summertime does tend to have that lull in activity. Next up, we've got the multiple pilot training certificates, and I would say here something that I've been waiting for quite a bit of time. I did not expect such inertia in the multiple pilot training certificates, although some is of course to be expected looking at the small volumes. So we had a massive sale late January that dropped the price off to 1.2 billion. You can see the volumes here, and it actually took almost 2 months for these volumes to be absorbed and for prices to start to go back up a little bit, including the pressure of plex that we've seen in the last couple of months. Oh, actually should go here for that. It was surprising how long multiple pilot train certificates managed to stay below 1.3 billion, but now we are above that, and I think once this trend has started, a catch up to what's happening with Plex is on the books now. So we're well above 1.3 billion for the sellers, and buyers are up above 1.2 billion as well. I think we will see a trend start here. Next up, we've got the skill extractors that do mirror Plex pretty closely, but have basically already hit that plateau at the 1 year high point. So we are talking 357 million for the sellers, 340 for the buyers. And while we know that there is this strong correlation between extractors and Plex, but sometimes they move a little bit differently because we can, of course, target sales or target special actions around one of these two, and then they'll still communicate quite a lot, but one of them will move a little bit more quickly if they're the ones that are basically targeted by CCP, you could say. So this to me is another one of these indications that sure, we are at a 1 year high point for Plex, but I don't think there's that much more room to grow. So we could really be at a high point for the longer term. It all depends on FanFest, of course. The impact on the injectors, these high prices should start to show something, and well, maybe it's still quite hesitant, but we are probably starting to form a bottom at around 630 million for that average price. You can see the 5-day moving average moved just below that and is now on its way back up a little bit. So we're talking 640 million for the sellers, 620 for the buyers, and this is also pretty interesting, probably a turnaround, because that average price of 630 is right in the middle of these two. So this does show that the market is not confident. We should be dumping lots of large scale injectors which just don't get sold, and then there's even more dumping happening to the buyers. Then you would get an average closer to the 620. No, we're right in between here. I think the market is starting to create a bottom for these large scale injectors, and I don't think small scale injectors can do something different. No, here we go. We're seeing the same thing, right? Double bottom a little bit right here as we went below. I think this is the 135 million mark. But you can see that the last couple of daily averages are back above that line. 128 for the sellers in Tranquility Trading Tower, 134 in GDA 44, and then 120 million for the buyers. Narrower margin, maybe a little bit more narrow here as well. And the average price, that's always very difficult to say. I think there must be like more trade happening in GDA itself in order to get these types of average prices, or there could still be something wrong with this part of the chart right here, because it does feel a little bit weird. That should be a 135, and we're nowhere near that even for the sellers. Alright, let's move on to the daily alpha injectors then, that have slowed down their increase, but still substantially above 45 million ISK, which does make them pretty expensive. 47.5 million for the sellers, 43.5 for the buyers. Now that's a pretty narrow margin. Here they are definitely competing quite heavily on this upswing. And to me, this indicates that there is a lot of interest in the daily alpha injectors. Now you could, I've mostly been speculating that there are a lot of free-to-play players in EVE Online that basically set this item as one of their daily goals. Potentially not exactly daily, but something to hunt for, to try and earn around 50 million on a daily basis. 40 million, 45 million is a little bit more comfortable, of course, but that's probably one part of it. It's definitely possible as well that a lot of more veteran players are using this to basically build up their alts as well. So it has a lot of uses, maybe not only for new and free-to-play players. And finally, we've got the hypercores that are also starting to hesitate, right? We actually hit that 1 year high point a little bit earlier in the month. We're still at the 330,000 ISK mark on average on the chart, but you can see here the pressure has started. 321,000 for the sellers, still above 300,000 for the buyers. Still makes it quite expensive, but seeing that hesitation here, seeing the hesitation in the large skill injector starting to form that bottom, I would say that, yeah, in my book, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know for sure, but in my book I do think that Plex will start to stall as well. At this point already doesn't have that much more increased potential, and maybe even selling is the right thing to do. But of course, 1 month from now or a little bit over that, we'll have FanFest, and that could change the dynamic quite substantially. It's always a little bit risky to decide on big actions just before FanFest. But yeah, if you're before everyone else, you'll reap the benefits. Next up, we've got the Milano market coming in at 10 minutes. Don't have a lot of room left here, so I'm gonna try and get this to work. All right, 10 minutes, here we go. Let's start with Tritanium as always. Basically bounced off of that 4.0 ISK mark on that 5-day moving average. Quite a steep decline all of a sudden that accelerated up into last week, and then now we get a little bit of a bounce here. So sellers are at, let's see, mostly JIDA here, of course, 417 for a small one, 425 for most, and buyers are still just above 4 ISK, but not by too much. And then the worrying thing you could say is that we still have like 650 plus million units that are being sold here at the most aggressive price. That is quite a lot of it. If this pressure continues for too long and these buyers break below 4 ISK, we could be looking at another downtrend where perhaps sellers will be willing to go down to 4 and buyers will then be at like maybe a 370, 350 or something like that. So lookouts below. There is still continued pressure on Tritanium at the moment, but for now 4 ISK has been defended. Then we've got the pyrite chart. That's exactly what I was sort of talking about, right? We're maybe at this defense point for Tritanium here, able to stay there for almost 2 months, but then we break down again and it's 10 ISK. That now becomes the new average. 1020 for the sellers and buyers at 967, already below that 10 ISK mark. And still, you can see here, a couple days ago, the volumes are still coming in. Maybe a little bit of liquidation and a little bit of extra selling is happening due to Plex for Good at the moment. I'm pretty sure that there are players that have big holdings that are also just, you know, willing to dump and sell at potentially losses or lower prices at the moment just to get the ISK to buy the Plex in order to do Plex for Good, which also corresponds a little bit with that rush over the last month or so, bringing us to that 1-year high point. And I think, yeah, with Plex for Good being over, this could turn out to again be that top. And then this could hopefully be the bottom for Pyrite as well. Let's hope that we can defend 10 ISK here. Let's see if Mexalon is following the trend. Yeah, that's interesting and sort of speaks, I think, to the theory here, because Mexalon did just make its way back below 75 ISK, 73 ISK for the sellers and almost 70 ISK for the buyers. Super narrow margin here, and the volumes do feel a little bit more in line with perhaps being able to very quickly go back towards a 75 or above here. So maybe a little bit of selling that's putting some pressure on the price. But there is another theory that I read about as well. Maybe I'll touch on that when it's more fight, but that is that increased availability that happened in December with the changes could start to really ripple through the entire economy as bigger groups start to fully organize their mining fleets. But first, let's take a look at my favorite, of course. Here is Isogen. And well, look at that hesitation here. You could again read this in two different ways. You also have a very big volume spike happening right here. And so you could say it's that same theory. Someone or a couple of players or a number of players basically sold Isogen a little bit more aggressively because of Plex for Good, but of course, selling well above 200 ISK. We haven't seen that in a very, very long time for Isogen. So it could just be opportunistically trying to sell at this price range rather than specifically for Plex for Good. And still, despite that, 223 for the sellers, 207 for the buyers. And this is what I like to see, right? Look at the top selling, 6 million, 1 million, 150,000. And then of course here we got 30 million, 10 million, 30 million. We do still have those reserves, but we touch on that 225 at with 640 million units, but it's already on the front page. So this to me is again, we are nibbling at those reserves, at those old stocks, and we're actually going to hit that 225 potentially decently quickly. for that big order, although they only have 6 more days in order to start to sell at that price range. But still, I would not be surprised that does, if we can get rid of these big orders, which we will eventually, and especially this really big one, that they'll start to again spread out and head towards even higher prices than this, because the actual supply coming from Losec for Isogen has to be a lot lower than like batches of 30, 60 and 600 million units. So this trend is continuing. A little bit of a lull here. Could be because we went well above 200 all of a sudden. Could also be because of Plex for Good. Then we've got the Inoxium market that does a bit of a jump up here, staying in range, but basically being on the expensive side at the moment. 1400 for the sellers, exactly. 1366 for the buyers. This is exactly what I was talking about, and this, in my opinion, is going to be the dynamic that will eventually take over in Isogen as well, where buyers are really forced up towards those seller prices. And you can see here those volumes, right? We get one that has 13.5 million, 5 million and a couple at a million, but other than that it's really tiny volumes of Noxium that are being brought to this market, just because of how risky everything is. And you can also see that it takes a bit of time for that supply to materialize here. There's not that much being brought in every 24 hours, and so at the moment, on that lower supply, we are talking high prices to 1400 disk for Noxium. The Zydrine market is, I would say, stabilizing, but stabilizing at also a pretty high price, well above 1000 disk. 1161, that's actually pretty high. And here, same story, because we are completely dependent on imports from Nulsec. Although we have more stability in those groups, they still dictate the price, and so buyers are forced up to 1157 in order to try to pick up some Zydrine. That potentially could lead to even higher prices on this as well. And let's see what Megasite is doing, also stabilizing at that higher range rather than just below 750. We are now just below 1000 disk for Megasite. 977 for the sellers and 945 for the buyers. Bit more margin here, which I think is also to be expected, considering that you got less of that full Nulsec cartel for Megasite, but you get some decent sources from Wormhole Space and from Triglavian Space coming in potentially here as well. But very interesting. We are definitely heading back towards the old days where the Nulsec minerals are definitely expensive, right? 1000 disk for a single mineral. Haven't seen that in a very long time, actually. Now, with the added, probably potentially kings of being expensive and being difficult, being the Losec ones, which is Isogen and Noxium, and then the Isaac ones really struggling a little bit to become relevant compared to their prices. I mean, it's still definitely relevant to the economy, but price-wise, right? Noxium, Zydrine, stuff like that does feel like it's a price to go after, that it's worth that extra risk of going into dangerous space. Finally, we also have Morphite that is slowly continuing. Ooh, it's downtrend. Yeah, look at that. We're actually going through the 40,000 ISK mark on the average price. 42,400 for the sellers, 36,500 for the buyers. And this is the story that I have been telling since the start. Basically, number one casualty in price of the doubling of the available resources in New Eden is, of course, Morphite, because it was so expensive. 75,000 disk here in November, when I think most things were announced that we would get another doubling of the availability. And so everyone at first, of course, that has the option of mining Morphite is going to focus on that. And the interesting bit is that it hasn't really moved into like Zydrine or Megasite or something like that. You can see those prices have actually gone up, but a Reddit thread actually mentioned that it has moved into that moon mining potential. And so at first all you know, without even needing efficiency gains or anything like that, Morphite immediately became a casualty of its increased availability. Second in line is the advanced moon materials. We have seen that in Eve Talk as well. We'll cover that in a little bit, but potentially this will eventually trickle down to normal minerals as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if even titanium, for instance, here is only the beginning of potentially a new sort of an oversupply situation. Although it does take more effort to bring everything to the market in today's EVE Online, it seems to be potentially doable for those big groups to actually do all of that. And so we get quite a bit of pressure happening in those high-sec minerals here all of a sudden as well. Next up, we've got the PI market. That's coming in at 20 minutes. There we go. As always, we start with the broadcast nodes back up above 1.5 million ISK, 1.7 even for the sellers, 1.4 for the buyers. I would say this is pretty much on a normal price range. This entire glut here is actually CCP's doing. We have to be honest here. This was an announcement from CCP that they were going to planning to nerf the amount of PI needed in building larger ships, and then they did a double whammy. They actually announced that they were planning or looking into adding PI materials into moon mining as well, and then of course the prices cratered because of that. Now they're still working on that change, on that rebalancing of the blueprints, where, you know, they made at least a little bit of an announcement that they would try to, for instance, diversify dreadnoughts from carriers, so that dreadnoughts would potentially become a little bit cheaper to make, easier to make, so that dread bombs could still be a viable playstyle or tactic in nullsec. And I think this is what has brought back quite a bit of demand, but you can also see how violently the prices can shift here. I do think a lot of it is still speculation, and when CCP actually announces what they're going to do for the blueprints, I think this could have a very big impact on PI. But for now, all of the indications have been that if there's anything that's going to be rebalanced first, it is the PI part of those larger ships. And the thinking here, I think, is that if they do change things so that they if they want to change things so that you can more easily make dreadnoughts, make them more cheaply, and that you can actually bring them, you know, create dread bombs and things like that, they will potentially need to do other stuff except for PI. And if that happens, you could actually see an increased demand, an increased need, because you can actually make even more ships because of that. And so I think this is a little bit of speculation on something like that happening, that not only will we nerf the PI needs in ships, but other stuff will get nerfed as well, so that overall actually more PI might just be needed and higher prices can be maintained. Then we've got construction blocks actually not doing badly, staying above 8,000 ISK for pretty much a month straight, 8.5 and above for the sellers, almost 8,000 ISK for the buyers. So this does show again that slightly stronger demand at the moment. Then we get consumer electronics starting to break back down though, so it doesn't last forever. 7.4 for the sellers, 6.9 for the buyers. A bit of pressure here, but from a price point at 8,000 ISK, that was definitely the best we've seen in pretty much a full year. Coolants still really strong, staying above 10,000 ISK is super impressive. That is its historical normal price. It's even 11,200 for the sellers, but buyers below 10,000 ISK. Trying to open up a little bit of margin here, showing that maybe demand is not just here to stay. I think this basically also to me indicates that a lot of what's happening is speculative. It's not really we need a lot of coolants, we'll need a lot of consumer electronics, but rather if the changes do happen the way we think, for instance the production of larger ships, that could be this increased demand. And so this is potentially why we are sometimes seeing big gaps opening up and prices coming back down quite sharply. cryoprotected solutions, those are still doing quite well, of course. Well, going down a little bit, 127,000 for the sellers, 116 for the buyers. Tied to implants, obviously we had our first boom up to 130 here when implant BPCs would drop from one of the events late last year, and since then we've actually stayed pretty damn high. I still don't have an exact explanation why we managed to go even higher to 150 last week, but it must, in my opinion, be tied to implants and things like that. Maybe even the compression patch could be part of it. I'm not sure. Then we've got enriched uranium, and that's impressive. 1 year high point. We're recovering from it already, right? There is quite a bit of stuff out there available to take advantage of these higher prices, but it's still 11,850 for the first seller, 9,700 for the buyers. Back to a historically normal price, I would say, for enriched uranium. It's harder to make than coolants, so it should be more expensive than coolants. It is tied to fuels, so those higher prices, they seem to have something to do with that part of the category as well. And at the moment we are quickly recovering because, well, if you go up to 12,500, 13,000 disc, there are players out there that have been making a lot of enriched uranium and have not been selling it below 10,000 disc. That can pretty quickly bring in the supply. Then we get integrity response drones, seeing a little bit of pressure, a little bit of hesitation, but we're still above 1.5 million for the sellers. Even the buyers are above 1.5 million, so that is still actually pretty decent for advanced PI. Then we get mechanical parts. Look at that, trying to get back to 10,000 disc at this point as well. 9.9 for the sellers, 8.2 for the buyers. Quite impressive and very good news for those that follow my way of doing PI. It's the lazy way, but I just make refined PI materials and I make stuff that's tied to fuels because there is this consumption aspect. Fuel gets used up, and so for me, coolants, mechanical parts are definitely on the menu and are selling pretty well at the moment. We get our nanites, look at that, close to a 1 year high point all of a sudden, also starting to break out. 5,750 for the sellers, 5,550 for the buyers. Now that's still relatively low for a refined PI material, but on this 1 year chart, it's pretty damn good. So I do expect a little bit of supply to come to bring that price back down, but it's yet another one that's able to definitely trade above its average for the last year. Nano factories had, in my opinion, a little bit of a speculative jump here, maybe on a lack of supply as well. Managed to make its way back to 1.5 million, but we're back down to 750, which is pretty normal on this full 1 year chart. It's actually above 800,000 disc for the sellers, 715 for the buyers. So that, again, to get this average price, you gotta have people that actually buy from these sellers and others that dump to these buyers. And this to me is another indication that there's a little bit more speculation at play in advanced PI materials, trying to look forward, trying to divine what CCP is planning to do for the BPCs for production on the larger ships, and that's what you get then, potentially some volatile stuff. Organic mortar applicators doesn't seem to be all that popular, staying below 700,000 disc for the week. 690 for the sellers, 653 for the buyers. Here we are clearly suffering from a complete lack of demand, and I'll be honest, if I had to take a gamble, if I had to say, all right, let's maybe invest a couple hundred million disc in some PI, hoping that the changes will be profitable that way, I would gamble on something like that, although it's a very big gamble and maybe there's information that I don't have. This is close to a 1 year low point at 650,000 disc. You're buying really cheaply, and maybe it can basically ride a wave of other advanced PI materials going up, for instance, requiring some organic mortar application production to be switched to something else that could be good for the item. This would be, the way I would go, but of course a lot of speculation is in other stuff at the moment that will be more directly affected. Recursive computing modules going back below 1 million, just 1 million for the sellers, 900,000 for the buyers, seeing some pressure here. Then we've got the robotics chart trying to stay towards that 70k, 69.5 for the sellers, 68,000 in fact for those buyers. So that margin is very narrow. The real question here, I would say, is will demand keep up, which for now does seem to be strong enough to eventually chew through some of these reserves and push us to a higher price, or will eventually demand drop off? and then we could, which is what's happening at the moment, I think. We're seeing a little bit of pressure. I don't know, we never actually broke 70k, except on a couple of daily averages. It could be interesting. We could really still go either way for robotics on continued demand and then a little bit of supply slumping here and there. We could actually break through 70k and then we could go up to a well higher price, or if demand drops off all of a sudden, we could be back in the slump pretty quickly. Interesting to see us be here for almost 2 months and we're still browsing quite heavily for all of that robotics here at pretty narrow margins between those highest or those lowest sellers and those highest buyers. Then we get self-harmonizing power cores. In my opinion, more of a show again that there's quite a bit of speculation happening when you can reach 2 million for a couple of days and then you go back down to 125. 10 days later, that's quite speculative in my opinion. 1.3, 1.4 million for the sellers, almost 1.2 million for the buyers. The sterile conduits are actually just coming from a 1-year high point, almost reached 1.4 million on this one, back down to 1.15, so almost 1.2 million for the sellers here, almost a million for the buyers. Again, to me, lower volumes as well, quite a bit of speculation, people trying to get into position for the change that CCP has announced, but hasn't actually told us the details of. Then we get Yukomi superconductors staying above 70k. I'd say that's all right. 75,000 for the sellers, 67 for the buyers. And finally, the wetware mainframes are again on the other side of the equation. Definitely pretty low, 1.4 to 1.3 million on this one, which would be another one where I would potentially try. If I would invest at a low point, not at a high point or even coming down from a high point. So this would be it again. Now it is possible that in the current blueprints that wetware mainframes just aren't that needed compared to some of the others that are going for well above 1.5 million. But my thinking is, if there's actually this increased need for some of the other ones, this could actually translate into less supply here as well, which could become your opportunity. Next up, advanced PI materials, 31 minutes. Nice and round timestamp so far. Let's start as always with the carbides. Here is crystalline carbonite, and so this is the story that I think could dominate us and could really mean be very, very careful around Tech 2 at the moment. Another 1-year low point going down to 100 ISK, less than that for the sellers, 96 ISK for the buyers of crystalline carbonite, super low prices. And so here the thinking is that after fully optimizing and grabbing all of that morphite, which was like crazy expensive of course on a single mineral, now the next focus for the potentially increased increased potential for mining has gone towards moon mining, which is creating this massive oversupply of moon mining materials, and thus lower prices have to become part of the equation, which could eventually lead to low prices for a sustained period of time for Tech 2 ships. I think part of it is that we really don't see any major wars, so everyone can just, do all the moon mining that they want, create all of the stuff that they want, and a hot war could definitely change a lot of that stuff. But this could also be something that CCP is actually eyeballing, and we could still see changes to all of this as well being announced around FanFest. So for me, this is not necessarily a jumping point, because this could be just something that's become structural, but I do think that there are forces that could upset this new oversupply situation, which would be some real action in Nullsec or even FanFest. So let's take a look at the next one. Here is titanium carbide for Caldari, also 1-year low point, also under risk. 110 for the sellers, 92 for the buyers. You can see demand just isn't really there. Supply is absolutely massive. We've got Fernite carbide for Minmatar stuff, same story, also coming to 100, 107 for the sellers, 100 for the buyers. And then finally tungsten carbide for Amar. Actually a little bit different here. Someone came in probably and bought quite a bit of it. But we are still well below the entire chart for the year, 120 for the sellers, 114 for the buyers. And if I'm not mistaken, pressure is starting to push through on the metamaterials as well. Let's take a look at these photonic metamaterials, still hovering around that 10,000 ISK. Sellers 9.9, buyers 9.5. That is starting to show a little bit of pressure here as well. Then we've got non-linear metamaterials, right? 17.5, definitely the low end of the trade range as well. 17.6 to 16.4. Then for Minmatar, it's plasmonic metamaterials. All right, a little bit of a bump right now. We actually went up to 17,500, but it gets plugged pretty quickly. 16,000 for the sellers, 15.8 for the buyers. And then we've got terahertz metamaterials that are slowly coming down as well, and again trading at the lowest range for the year, 13,150 to 12,750. So overall, all of this should mean pretty cheap Tech 2 stuff at the moment. And I think we've seen last week that that is exactly the case. And does the story, or the question really is this the time to massively buy, or is this the new structural reality? And does that mean that cheap Tech 2 ships are going to become part of the story after basically capital ships taking the brunt of the nerfs? What the hell is all of this here in local? Now Tech 2 ships could actually become maybe even oversupplied from CCP's perspective. We will see how all of that evolves. We still have some others, and they were not doing too well either. So some other advanced movements. Here was fermionic condensate, one of those only ones that really tried something. Went up to 80,000 ISK, a 1-year high point, but you can see that it just completely gets crushed on that opportunity, and we're already back down to 55 and 49,000 for the buyers, so below the entire chart for the buyers. Ferrogel 1-year low point. I think here we're going to be able to go through these pretty quickly because it's just uniform across the board. Moon mining has exploded. The organizations have been created, and now everyone is in their barges. They probably have that Rorcal support. Local compression will probably also massively help with making this whole market far more efficient. Transportation will take less effort, which means that you can again spend a little bit more time mining. And all of that is meaning that lots and lots and lots of 1-year low points across the board in advanced moon materials, nanotransistors, phenolic composites, hovering at that 1-year low point, staying above 1,000, but not by too much. And let's see if these guys can break 10,000 ISK. Then still not. So pressurized oxidizers still above 10,000 ISK, and the reinforced carbon fibers. Ooh, look at that. Landing on 10k, that pressure is mounting here as well. 9.9 for the sellers, 9.8 for the buyers, but the pressure is here. And then again, ceramic fibers, pretty much a 1-year low point. So pretty short advanced moon mat section, but the story here is that the full organization and thus the double availability that at first really cost Morphite quite a bit of that price, right? Almost having it from the high point, but here we had the doubling in availability. We still managed 75k here, and now we're down to around 40k average price, but there's more mining potential out there. And then the next thing that they're focusing on is not something like Zydrine, which is up, not something like Megasite or Isogen, which is up, but it's actually moon mining, which is causing all of these advanced moon mats to be down the drain, you could say, in price, or super cheap if that's what you prefer, of course. So let's see what the impact is on the Tech 2 ships, and I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of selling this week, but let's take a look at 3740. There we go, and we start with the Basilisk. Alright, well, maybe some people followed my advice. Very pronounced 1-year low point at 150, and actually a little bit of buying. We are up to 170 for the sellers. That's not enough in my opinion to be selling, but buyers forced up to 165 and 158 is definitely worse than last week. So last week was your chance to buy the cheapest possible Basilisk. I expect maybe some more continued pressure, but it was a very, very pronounced 1-year low point. So happy actually to see that quite a bit of buying happened, and that we don't just keep going down in price. Cerberus though is still going down in price, but also going for around 150. 156 for the sellers, 143 for the buyers. Well, if the Basilisk has any predictive, or the Basilisk chart, I should say, has any predictive power, then that means you should be buying a Cerberus at the moment. Then we get the Guardian. This is the unfortunate thing then, of course, we're not going to break out to 190, we're not going to break out to 220, which I was kind of hoping for when stuff like this was happening, but no, we are playing with new low points. Guardian selling for 174, buyers at 152, very, very cheap as well, of course. Then we've got the Hound that broke 20 million last week, is still here, 21 million for the sellers, 13.4 for the buyers. Could be an opportunity considering that CCP has announced that they're at least looking at these ships and that they are going to allow bombing runs to be done a little bit more quickly. But so here the Hound's still super cheap and demand is basically non-existent. Then we've got the Ichthyrsa, also 1 year low point at 550 million, 586 to 540. Again, I would definitely be careful here. If I would be buying stuff, I'd be buying stuff where I could still double down on it later down the line or anything like that. But this is quite a bit more expensive, of course, but it is a very pronounced 1 year low point. Ishtar continuing to go down, ouch. Although it does make for a pretty cheap Ishtar, heading for 150 for a heavy assault cruiser, basically 159 to 152. And so yeah, when you bought below 180, that looked like a really good deal. Turns out that that was not going to be the low point just yet. Manticore still holding quite well and staying above 22.5. 22.5 for the buyers, 23 million for the sellers. So this one is staying a little bit more expensive compared to the other stealth bombers, I think. Then we get the Munin settling at 150 for a heavy assault cruiser here again as well, 160 to 151. The Nemesis though, another 1 year low point as well. 18.25 million, 16 million for the buyers. Basically, stealth bombers are not too popular at the moment, maybe because battleships have become that powerful, that tanky potentially, that players aren't really using them. Again, this to me looks like a good time to try a buy order for a Nemesis. Buy a couple, but make sure that you're not spending all your ISK right away so that you can still continue to buy later down the line. Eventually, I do think all of this will turn around. Then we get the Oneros, another 1 year low point, 130-ish, yeah, 138, 139 actually for the sellers, 128 for the buyers. Then we've got the Panther, that's kind of interesting, not what I expected. I thought that we would actually start to see a more gradual and consistent downtrend in the price of these Tech 2 battleships because of course of the cost of the advanced move materials. We actually see a little bit of a jump up from the Panther from a 1 year low point, but still 1.1 billion doesn't feel like it's historically that crazy a price or that low a price, and buyers are just below a billion ISK. The Purifier is not able to defend 20 million, 18.5 now for the sellers, 18 million for the buyers. Also to me feels like a good time to try to maybe nibble a couple off the market at these prices. Perhaps you'll get cheaper ones later down the line, but this is already well below the chart. Then we get the Scimitar. Yeah, that's not a great chart if you're looking to make a lot of money. 140 million to 130 million. I would maybe buy one, but I'd be very careful on this one because of course the daily volumes make it a little bit harder to trade. Then we get the Widow staying at around a billion, 1.1 for the sellers and well below a billion for the buyers. And then finally the Zealot is holding on decently well to 160 range, 171 to 159. So for the Tech 2 ship market, there are a lot of very pronounced 1 year low points. In my opinion, you could buy some of these, but again, be careful. Don't keep some of your powder dry, because of course the story has shifted a little bit from, well, it's just there's no war, to also advanced movements are just being flooded on the market because of the potential of how much the game can now produce, and that could mean that Tech 2 ships will become cheaper. Is this something that CCP wants? is this something that's sustainable when, for instance, there is some more active war, more disruption of moon mining happening in Nullsec? That is, of course, the real gamble to take here. Next up, the Tech 3 ship market. So yeah, potentially first buff for the Proteus. Honestly, I think CCP has mentioned on quite a few occasions that they are looking at Tech 3 cruisers, not in an active development way, but like we gotta do something for the ships has been acknowledged. So it's gonna be interesting to see if that market has moved on the first announcement for the Proteus, and that is coming in at 44 minutes, let's say. Give me a little bit of room here for these Tech 3 ships, and we start as always with the destroyers. Here are the Confessors, staying below 50 million ISK. Didn't have that much supply last week, still not a lot of supply, but 108 here at 50 million should basically put a pin on that price. 44.7 million for the buyers. Basically, that one big supply dump is keeping us from breaking out. That should mean that we could see more supply in the Hecate and pressure on the price. It's going up a little bit, staying just above 50 million, 53 for the sellers, 46 for the buyers, but look at that, 12, 11, 18, last 3 orders within the last 24 hours is bringing in some supply. I think this will keep it in check, and potentially we could actually land back on 50 million because of the Confessor not needing a lot of ships. Then we get the Jackdaw. That one though is a different story, able to break out back to above 55 million, 58 for the sellers, 49 for the buyers, drawing in supply in the last couple of days, yes, but no crazy numbers. So yeah, the Hecate actually, I don't expect it to go down now. I do expect it to basically stay flat, maybe even go up a little bit more in price, because the Jackdaw needs ships in order to rectify this much higher price than everything else, unless another decoupling is happening. That's always possible. The Jackdaw is, in my opinion, a crazy good ship, the best this tactical destroyer, so that is possible as well. But if that's not what happened, then I think the Confessor is basically stuck because of that 100 plus ship sell order, and thus we should see supply in the Jackdaw. Probably same thing in the Hecate. They're staying above 50 million. And the Jackdaw could recover here decently quickly. And then of course the Zwepel, we're not expecting anything too special. Yeah, 42.5 million, completely different price range, 44 to 38.5 million, and a little bit of a bump here on slower volumes as well, but basically you gotta completely take that one as a separate thing from the other tactical destroyers. And then the cruisers, here is the Legion chart, all right, making its way back up to 190. 190 for the sellers, 168 for the buyers. Really big margin. This is practically a tradable margin. Grab a buy order there, put up a sell order, you actually are making a profit here. That's pretty interesting, but doesn't happen all the time, of course. Then we've got the Loki. Okay, flat at 190 here as well. 190 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. This is kind of interesting. Let's see if the Proteus is then up a little bit. No, also pretty flat, but just below 190. All right, 190 to 182. And then finally, we've got the Tengu that is also at 190. All right. 196 to 174. Pretty wide margins between sellers and buyers. Most of these cruisers selling for around 190 million ISK. I do think that there is now like a predictable trade range that you could say, right? When you see the Tengu here touch 180 on the average, look at the buy prices and you can probably buy well below 180 and then sell for 190 is always possible. The Proteus has been pretty stable, but again, break that average price below 180 here, or have the chart touch that, you can probably have a buy opportunity here. The Loki is a little bit more difficult, but if we really go down below 190 on the chart, I would look at the buy prices again. And then the Legion just did that thing where it touched 170, you can buy, and then you could sell at 190 or above pretty damn easily. So there is actually trade potential in the strategic cruisers, and I would say the fact that CCP is looking at them does mean that you could potentially keep or start trading in here a little bit, in my opinion. It really has changed the dynamic of the market. The fact that I don't remember exactly when anymore, but the fact that you no longer lose skill points when you're blown up in one of these strategic cruisers, making it, in my opinion, far less of a gamble and much more of something that you could actually try to trade by buying low and selling high. And then we get the extra product for the week. Let me quickly drink first though. There we go. Yeah, we're gonna take another look at some gas products coming in at 48.40. Let's take a look at that. Manufacturing and research materials, gas clouds. We'll start with the fullerenes. Just take a quick look at these, but honestly, I don't expect anything too world-shattering. Haven't really heard a lot there, so I think MoSpace is also decently stable. C28 pretty available, low end of the range at 5k. C32 pretty low here as well. C320 definitely low. C50 definitely low. Yeah, it's gonna be a story of quite enough availability and pretty low trade ranges. C60 same story. C70 a little bit better, but still well below average. C72 next, yeah, 1 year low point pretty much, and C84 1 year low point yet again. So the fullerenes do seem to be quite available and pretty cheap at the moment. Then we've got oh, compressed gas. Oh, I'll take a quick look at that in a moment. But first, let's do the Cito Miko stuff, which with the here is Ampere Cito, which is actually decently stable, a little bit expensive of course compared to 6 months ago, but it's doing all right. 115 to 100,000, decently narrow margin here as well. Amber Cito, or Amber Miko, excuse me, was pretty expensive here in October and in February, coming back down from that back to an average price, I would say. Azure Cito is pretty average. Azure Miko actually going back down as well towards more average prices. Interesting. Honestly, I'm a bit surprised here because this may be a little bit under the radar, but if they won't move on PI, perhaps they'll move on gas as well. Or if they'll move on PI, but they want to do a little bit more for changes to production for larger ships, maybe they'll look at gas as well. So Celadon Cito actually 1 year low point. And then the Miko was the one that gained most, but you can see that we are starting to come back down substantially for these prices as well. Golden Cito pretty low, I would even say. Golden Miko a little bit above average, but again lost quite a bit of what was gained in January, February at the start of the year. Lime Cito, yeah, not much to say here, but Lime Miko, ooh, an exception. Here we go, 1 year high point. Are we above 80? Yeah, look at that. Availability is basically gone. 170,000 now for the sellers, 70,000 for the buyers. So here, first one where basically we're coming across a real supply issue that's creating an opportunity. Malachite Cito then very low. Malachite Miko pretty expensive, nothing too crazy though. Vermilion Cito is low. Vermilion Miko is decently expensive, but also losing again from the high point in early March. Viridian Cito decently stable and average, and then Viridian Miko actually going down again from a high point in February here. So I would say overall supplies seem to be quite ample here as well, and we're mostly seeing pressure on the price with a single exception. Where is it? It's this one, the Lime Miko, that's actually completely ran dry in Jeddah. And then we'll quickly go through the compressed gases to see what's happening here. It is of course a new product, and I think we've settled quite quickly. 120,000 starting to come back down. Yeah, starting to come back down already. I mean, it is way too early, of course, to see a lot. Some of these are just not available, but you can see that prices have started to come back down. And this is going to be really interesting if the trade of gas is going to be dominated by these compressed items. The more we see pressure on these, I think the more they will start to take over trade from the actual goods or end product or fully expanded gas. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but of course we don't have a lot of data points on these just yet, but mostly I think we will start to get ample supplies. Let me know in the comments if that's right or wrong. Here you can clearly see we are starting to already come back down in price. Maybe I should actually do a little bit of this. Yeah, availability though, a little bit here. Limecito. Ooh, yeah, lime actually. Look at that, everything has moved. So why would you buy this stuff at 168 when you get the compressed gas version at 68,000? You probably want to buy this. So availability, yeah, it's still not great, but I'll try to keep an eye on these a little bit, maybe in like a month or so, and see how things are moving. So the Fullerites, yeah, they're there. It is being done. That's pretty cool. So that's interesting. I really wonder if compressed gas is going to be basically the market to look at rather than the booster gas clouds and the fullerene markets going forward, which could be the story across the board. Same thing with moon mining, where the compressed items will actually become the stuff that's traded rather than the end products, and that all of that could mean that increased availability and thus those lower prices. But of course, before all of that, I personally am still really curious to see what CCP will announce for FanFest, between now and FanFest, how things will evolve. Not really willing to speculate all that much, except I would say that for me, there's a high chance that Plex is at a high point at the moment, and or is going to form a top going towards FanFest. Anyways, that's it for this Eve Talk. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.